with protesters on a visit to North Wales. Thousands of Marks and Spencer staff will march on London later today to protest against plan called
Putting the questions you want answered 24 hours a day.
Andrew Marr, BBC News. Could you be a little clearer about that, please?
Chasing the facts on the campaign trail.
Why should the voters trust anything you say?
Tackling the parties face to face. Wherever the candidates are, we are there too.
Hi, good morning. I've been expecting you.
That's our election promise. Vote 2001 on BBC television, radio and online.
Statistically speaking, that's 100% total coverage.
Thank you, Peter.
Sport is all about timing. Miss it and you miss out. BBC News 24 sports updates are at 16 and 35 minutes past every hour, so you'll always know the score. All the main sports stories twice an hour. BBC News 24.
Britain and the US propose an end to sanctions on civilian goods to Iraq. Israeli helicopter gunships attack Palestinian buildings in the Gaza Strip. About 200 farm workers are feared to have been kidnapped by rebels in Colombia. And Britain's Deputy Prime Minister drives home his party's manifesto with a punch.
Declan Curry can tell us more. Declan.
If someone chucked something at him, he instinctively turned around and hit the guy, but I'm not so sure that that's going to damage John Prescott. You know, most people I've spoken to, and it seems to be going this way, are saying, well, that's what I would have done.
Seasoned politician, veteran election campaigner. The day they launched the election manifesto, and he's in a brawl in public in the street. It can't be good.
I can't believe you're accusing me of putting spin on something. I was only saying what I was saying, like the taxi driver last night and the one this morning was saying. They say, well, quite right.
100 miles of a nuclear button, as I am now getting really worried.
Peter O'D here says, John Prescott certainly got my vote when he gave the egg thrower more than he bargained for. He's got a better left than Lewis.
Very quickly to David Flint. Yesterday's incident shows John Prescott is no different from most members of the general public. He has the right to defend himself, as most men would. I support him all the way.
Breakfast TV at bbc.co.uk is the address as usual. What is not as usual is the fact that Isabel Lang standing with us here. Is it that bad outside?
It's pretty bad outside, actually, Sophie. Awful travel conditions again this morning, as yesterday. Low pressure right across the UK.
To respond in that human way, the law recognises that. And, of course, you're entitled, in those circumstances, as Charlie says, to chin him and then move forward and defend yourself. And, of course, I think that this man will now be prosecuted.
OK. But you've represented a lot of celebrity clients over the years. Surely this is going to be pretty bad for his reputation, you don't think?
No, I don't think it will, actually.
He had boob jobs, and Mel B seems to have sort of gone to a fairly large size. But how easy, and there seems to be a lot of safe breeze,
Maybe 14 in any brightness in Northern Ireland. But let's just take...
Jubilant scenes in Dortmund and on Merseyside last night as Liverpool completed a SF plant in Seacombe yesterday. 60 firefighters were needed to bring the flames under control. I was thinking about what's coming next. The biggest peacetime recruitment drive in British history starts in the northwest today. Organisers of the 2002 Commonwealth Games in Manchester need 15,000 people for a variety of roles.
Work everywhere, including sports venues and the athletes' village. Responsibilities will include drug testing, accreditation, VIP services and first aid. Volunteers must...
Prescott as the general election descends into violence. Well, very good morning to you. The time approaches 7 o'clock. It's Thursday, 17th of May. You're waking up to GMTV today. So, what do you think about John Prescott's brawl with a protester? He says he was acting in self-defence. Others say his actions weren't what we expect from a senior politician. What do you think? What would you have done?
Over to the little theatre, he was met by a crowd of protesters. And as he was walking along to the theatre, An egg appeared to hit the Deputy Prime Minister on the side of the head. He then retaliated almost immediately, throwing a punch with his left fist into the jaw of the protester. The protester then grabbed hold of John Prescott and pushed him down onto the wall, where the two men got into a fight. Other protesters got involved until the police came along and tried to break the whole thing up. Now, Mr. Prescott did continue to go inside the little theatre.
A hostile crowd. I walked through all the jostling and I was attacked by an individual. In the melee that followed, I clearly defended myself. I believe someone is now being questioned by the police, and it would be quite improper for me and quite wrong to add any further comment.
Saying there, are they having a bit of a laugh at this, or what?
Well, some people are. I'm not sure that everyone's having a laugh at it, because they really won't be happy with headlines like these, Eamon, on the day that they were releasing their manifesto. So this is really not what they wanted. They're, of course, defending John Prescott at the moment, saying that it was self-defence. And the Tories are just saying, well, in fact, William Hague, I thought, had one of the best lines where he said, well, if Prescott had actually studied judo like Mr. Hague does, then he'd have perhaps been able to get over it all much quicker. But punches, but in fact, no eggs, because they were probably in short supply that day.
Yes. I love that Conservative explanation there. So is the suggestion that William Hague would have done an Eric Cantona?
Going to make a new cabinet after the election comes to look at the people he's got around him. He's not going to make John Prescott Home Secretary, is he?
No, but probably Sky Sports are the...
But I guarantee that this piece of footage will be used time and time again, and he will never get away from eggs. I bet this morning he's having a bacon sandwich and not an egg in sight.
Yes, well, as long as he's got that ear cleaned out.
Pick up more from Sophie. Thank you very much. Well, ask any political pundit and they'll tell you it's all about connecting with the voter. Well, John Prescott, it seems, took the advice a bit too literally yesterday. The Deputy Prime Minister remains unabashed about punching a protester, but will the incident do any long-term damage? Well, we're joined now by Carol Walker. What's the fallout going to be from all of this?
Well, I think one thing that you can say is that it's really brought the election campaign alive. Finally, something's happened. East want to talk to the Deputy Prime Minister about this incident. Now, as we've been hearing, a man has been already spoken to about it and released on police bail. But I think where I'm right in saying that this is the first time that a minister of his rank has actually got involved in a brawl, whoever started it, during the election campaign.
And obviously it wasn't just Prescott yesterday. There was started with Jack Straw being heckled at the Police Federation conference, then Tony Blair, who was berated by a woman whose partner is suffering from cancer.
It's always the general confrontation involving John Prescott in North Wales. The Deputy Prime Minister apparently lashed out after being pelted with an egg as he was jostled by an angry crowd outside a party rally in Rhyl. Labour said Mr Prescott had defended himself against attack, but the local Tory party candidate said he should resign. An inquiry is underway after fire ripped through a chemical plant on Merseyside. 2 people suffered minor injuries at the blaze of the BASF factory at Seacombe. Neighbouring houses were evacuated after a small explosion. Crews are still at the scene. Well, back to football now, and heartbreak for Wigan and Stoke in the playoffs last night.
John Prescott with that left jab there. The man who fired the egg, he has now been released from police custody.
Up 41 points, helped a bit by performance on Wall Street, which saw... Thank you very much. Stay with us for plenty more. Right now, though, time to join our teams across the UK. For a speech in Rhyl. 29-year-old man was arrested and later released on police bail. Opposition parties have criticised Mr Prescott for reacting in the way he did. Well, a short...
An end to sanctions on civilian goods in Iraq. Israeli helicopters have again attacked Palestinian areas in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. And still to come, President Bush's bright spark, how the American government plans to overcome the country's energy crisis. And now with business news, here's Michelle Hussein from New York.
Hello from New York on the day the Dow Jones crossed a key level for the first time in 8 months.
They've been out trying to woo voters in a bid for a second term in power. But events did not go according to plan. In North Wales, the Deputy Prime Minister John Prescott became involved in a brief fight as he arrived to address a rally. An onlooker threw an egg at him, prompting Mr Prescott to retaliate. Pictures later appeared to show that Mr Prescott threw the first punch. Afterwards, he said he was clearly defending himself. Police said they'd arrested a 29-year-old man in connection with the incident. Meanwhile, in central England, the Prime Minister, Tony Blair, was confronted by a woman over the government's health policies. The events overshadowed the launch of Labour's manifesto. In it, Tony Blair committed his party to a radical programme with the emphasis on investment and reforming key public services like health and education.
After 4 years in power, the Prime Minister says he wants more time to finish the job. This manifesto was a vision not just for a second term, but for the next decade, all based on a stable economy and the radical reform of public services.
A little more than what the Tories had done before, but not significantly. The real boost comes, the takeoff is now, and this is the real testing time for this government to see whether, money makes the difference. Well, the OECD says that the NHS is the most efficient delivery system that there is in the world. It may not be the best, but it's the most efficient pound for pound. And
if you was, you would do something about it. They're understaffed, they've got terrible facilities, the toilets are appalling, and Dr. Mahendram and their team of people, nurses and staff, are doing their best, and you're just not giving them the money to make the facilities better for them. You're not.
It's been rather a smoother day of campaigning for the leader of the main opposition Conservative Party. Labour said William Hague was offering nothing new, just their old watered-down promises. The leader of the Liberal Democrats, Charles Kennedy, said Mr Blair's manifesto proved Labour's poverty of ambition, and it misled the voters, he claimed, into believing that public services can be improved without raising taxes. Labour claimed this manifesto ambitions for Britain would help the country achieve its full potential. But the Prime Minister has another burning ambition. He wants to be the first Labour leader to go down in history as serving 2 full consecutive terms in power. He hopes this document will help him achieve just that. Beth Andrews-Roberts, BBC News, Westminster.
The European Union delegation is in Macedonia after warning the country against using what it called disproportionate force to defeat ethnic Albanian rebels. But the Macedonian president has repeated the government's warning that the rebels will face...
The Yugoslav armies piling on the pressure, now firmly in control of the southern Serbian village of Oravica, evicting Albanian rebel fighters who seized it last week. It's all part of a carefully coordinated plan. The Yugoslavs, NATO and Macedonia cooperating to rein in the rebels who've been threatening to destabilize the region. Many Albanian civilians have been left behind in Oravica. Now they're under Yugoslav rule again.
They came and started digging the trenches. I said the yard...
The party starts in 3 weeks' time.
That's all from Powerhouse for now. Join us again later, if you will, at a much earlier time than usual, 9 o'clock. Goodbye.
They won't give in, though, demanding more rights for Albanians in Macedonia. But the Macedonian army's equally determined, adamant that weeks of incursions by the rebels must be brought to a swift end. Jonathan Charles, BBC News, Macedonia.
President George W. Bush has given clues about...
that the other 49 states won't have to deal with the problems that we're already dealing with in California.
We're here because of the environmental advantages that this car brings.
But what about a different approach to the energy crisis, based on conservation, not increased fossil fuel production? This Virginia car dealership has started selling a hybrid petrol-electric car.
Like this, as you've got both.
But this model has to be ordered specially from Japan. It's expensive, and the US government doesn't give incentives to boost sales.
The truth is, fuel-efficient cars still represent a pitifully small segment of the American market. People here still believe that on the road, bigger is better, and nothing in George Bush's energy plan is likely to change that.
The US is the world's biggest consumer of energy.
Good morning. Well, we saw a lot of showers yesterday.
Resigns following his violent clash with protesters on a visit to North Wales. Thousands of Marks and Spencer to John Prescott following a violent clash with an angry protester during a visit to Rhyl in North Wales. Eggs were thrown at him and then a scuffle started. Pictures appeared to show that Mr. Prescott threw the first punch. The incident overshadowed many of the day's events, including the launch of the Labour Party manifesto, Ambitions for Britain.
A small-town event becomes a big political drama. The Deputy Prime Minister besieged by heckling protesters, and then completely out of the blue, an outburst of violence. Looking at the pictures again in slow motion, you can see the sequence of events unfold into a vicious scuffle. Labour sources say the egg thrown at Mr. Prescott could well have felt like a punch in the face, and he later defended his actions.
I got off my bus into clearly a hostile crowd. I walked through all the jostling, and I was attacked by an individual. In the melee that followed, I clearly defended myself.
The protester was arrested, but the local Conservative candidate has called on Mr. Prescott to resign. Senior party figures have been more restrained.
Of course, all of us in political life, we know that we are on occasion in positions where we are provoked or indeed under threat. What is important is to keep our cool. What is important is to engage in debate and not necessarily to lose one's temper in the process.
The guy shouldn't have thrown the egg, and the Deputy Prime Minister shouldn't have reacted in the way that he did. None of us is perfect, but both of them have to now be dealt with by the law in the usual way.
The papers this morning could have shown a beaming Tony Blair promoting his vision for Britain. Instead, it's his deputy throwing a punch. Not very New Labour at all. Philippa Thomas, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, as we've just heard, the incident stole much of the limelight from the launch of the Labour Party's manifesto. Speaking in Birmingham, Tony Blair said his party still had a great deal to do, but was looking forward to a Britain that was modern, fair and strong. He said the economic stability created during his government's first term of office would allow far-reaching reform of public services if Labour was re-elected. The Conservative leader, William Hague, dismissed Labour's manifesto as a watered-down version of the same promises they made last time. He told voters at a rally in Warwickshire that the Conservatives could win the election and urged supporters to rally behind the official line on Europe. Earlier, Mr Hague encountered a noisy reception when he visited Wolverhampton city centre. He was surrounded by a number of protesters, including some Labour supporters who heckled and jeered him. Mr Hague's walkabout was cut short from a scheduled 20 minutes to less than 5 minutes. Liberal Democrat leader Charles Kennedy also criticised Labour's manifesto plans. He said their sums just didn't add up.
I think that the Labour manifesto rather makes the Liberal Democrat case for us, because Gordon Brown would have people believe, just as William Hague would, that you can get something for nothing in life. People do want big improvements in the public services, in hospitals and schools, in the number of police at community level, in the support for pensioners. But you won't get it unless you put a price tag attached to it, and that Gordon Brown is too timid to do.
And for all the latest general election coverage, stay tuned to the BBC election channel, News 24, or log on to BBC News online at www.bbc.co.uk/news. In other news, thousands of Marks and Spencer workers from across Europe are expected to take part in a rally in London later.
William Hague was heckled on the campaign trail in Portsmouth and Wolverhampton. Not so much an election of apathy, but of antipathy. Voters seemingly already fed up with politicians of all political hues, and there's still 3 weeks to go before polling day. Dan Rivers, ITN.
Well, as Dan said, there are still 3 weeks left until Election Day, and with the manifestos all launched, the campaign really gets into full swing. Today, crime is expected to dominate the agenda. Here's our Westminster reporter, Angus Walker.
Anne Widdecombe is due to speak at the Police Federation conference in Blackpool later today. The Shadow Home Secretary will tell her audience of serving officers that police numbers have fallen under Labour, down by more than 2,000 since 1997. Tony Blair's battle bus tour continues in the Midlands today before the Prime Minister speaks at a rally in Manchester. Labour's manifesto promises 6,000 more police officers and an overhaul of the criminal justice system. But the economy remains the issue Labour puts at the top of its election agenda.
We now ask the British people for a mandate to get on with the job. A mandate for investment, a mandate for reform, a mandate to continue with a strong and strengthening economy where prosperity is open to all.
The Liberal Democrat leader Charles Kennedy will focus on his party's proposals for pensioners. The Lib Dems say they'll put a minimum of £5 a week on the basic state pension, rising to £15 for the oldest pensioners. 3 weeks to go, and if the Tories manage to seize the agenda, then Labour is likely to come under fire on the issue of law and order. After all, the level of violent crime is rising, and Tony Blair admitted that there's still lots of work to be done to make society a safer place. Angus Walker, ITN, Westminster.
Away from the election now, and there's been a big rise in the number of people dying from a rare form of liver cancer. In fact, the number of deaths has doubled over the past 30 years. Doctors believe the rise may be caused by women taking the contraceptive pill and smoking. Our medical correspondent Sue Saville has the details.
The alarming increase in
To whom is the Purple Cross awarded? A. Medical personnel, B. Children, or C. Animals? The answer is C. Animals. It was instituted by the RSPCA. Question 24. To which continent is the purple-fringed orchid native? A. Australia, B. Asia, or C. North America? The answer is C. North America.
8 with...
With traipsed. Traipsed is there for 8.
Says traipse means move wearily or reluctantly.
Yeah, it's a sort of weary word, isn't it?
A weary trig.
I went for a traipse over the hills. It's just, it's all sort of, I couldn't really be bothered.
Not very,
I
not
went
very
for
positive.
A risk,
Not very positive. No.
Yeah.
Calling for a radical overhaul of the exam system in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Proposals put forward by the National Association of Head Teachers include scrapping GCSEs and A-levels. Pupils would then set tests at 14 and 19, and similar to the French system. The former royal aide Jane Andrews is starting a life sentence for the murder of her wealthy lover Thomas Cressman. An Old Bailey jury rejected her claim she was acting in self-defence and accepted the prosecution case that she killed the businessman after he refused to marry her. The man accused of causing the Selby rail crash, which killed 10 people, appears in court today, charged in connection with their deaths. Gary Hart was driving the Land Rover, which ended up in the path of the GNER train, causing it to derail and smash into a goods train. Philip Ray-Smith reports.
36-year-old Gary Hart from Lincolnshire was charged last Friday with causing the deaths of 10 people by dangerous driving. At a news conference the day after the Selby train crash, his family said the accident had devastated him. 2 train drivers were amongst the 10 who died in the disaster last February. The police report into the accident described how a Land Rover came off a motorway, rolled down the railway embankment and then came to rest on the track. The Newcastle to London Express hit the car and derailed. It then struck a goods train coming in the opposite direction, which had 1,000 tons of coal on board. In an interim report, investigators said the crash was wholly exceptional and cleared the railway companies of any blame, saying there was nothing they could have done to prevent it. The early morning GNER train had 100 people on board. 76 of them were taken to hospitals in the area. Gary Hart was given police bail and appears before Selby Magistrates Court today. Philip Ray-Smith, ITN.
The graves of 3 victims of the Titanic will be exhumed today to try to identify those who were actually buried there. DNA tests will be carried out on the bodies, which are buried in Canada, and matched with those of surviving relatives. More than 1,500 people died in the accident in 1912, and many still haven't been identified. Thousands of Marks and Spencer's workers will march through London today, the majority of them from France, Spain and Belgium.
Is believed to be, perhaps not too surprisingly, the only Elvis football team in the world, and is currently riding high in the Edinburgh Five-a-Side League.
Even though we're getting beat 2-0 at the moment, but yes, it's doing really well. The team's been going since 1996, and it's really good to actually advertise Elvis in a really good thing. Gives it to the general public. It brings it out in the open, rather than just the fan club, you know.
But when it comes to bringing Elvis and the Memphis Mafia's activities to the world, not even the football team beats the Memphis Mafia's website.
It's good fun because we get a lot of communications from around the world. We could be talking to an Elvis fan in Japan one minute, and then the next minute we're in Sweden or something like that.
Having lost a son at her hands, how can I have a sorrow for her, really? I feel that the holiday she's going to have is the holiday she deserves.
Jane Andrews' parents left distraught and without comment. Their daughter, spending the first night of her sentence at Holloway Prison, is said to be considering an appeal. Robert Hall, BBC News at the Old Bailey.
The charity ActionAid is launching a national campaign today urging retailers and consumers to say no to the development of genetically modified coffee. The group argues that...
on the front of the Mirror with the headline, Manifesto, Prescott in amazing street brawl. The Daily Mail says the astonishing scene ended a disastrous day for the party when it finally met what it calls real voters. Now, the picture of Mr. Prescott being pushed against a small wall features on the Independent along with two others, saying that angry voters spoil Labour's big day. It also shows the Prime Minister's confrontation with a woman unhappy with the health service and the Home Secretary being heckled as he spoke to the Police Federation. The Daily Express puts the Prescott picture on its second page. It leads with the news that the Duchess of York's former dresser, Jane Andrews, was found guilty of murdering her lover. The Daily Telegraph sums up the day for Labour. It calls it the party's wobbly Wednesday. It adds that Labour's carefully stage-managed election campaign is in disarray and that the launch of its manifesto was totally overshadowed. The Times, though, concentrates on a new opinion poll for the paper. It suggests that support for the Conservatives has fallen further since the start of the campaign. The Times also reports that Labour would make a greater use of the private sector to ensure public services are reformed should it win the election. The Guardian reports that Labour has a secret plan to reform prisons. It says the creation of nearly 10,000 extra prison places will turn England and Wales into the prison capital of Europe. It's now 16 minutes to 6 and you're watching the ITV Morning News. Coming up, the daughter of President Bush is fined for underage drinking. This again after this short break.
That the Deputy Prime Minister John Prescott resigns following his violent clash with protesters on a visit to North Wales. Thousands of Marks and Spencer...
And they'll have cricket now, and England begin their quest for their fifth successive test.
Amid the lights, a power blackout.
We are on the air. Okay, good enough. Well, folks at home...
The West Coast energy crisis has the whole nation nervous. Businesses are losing money and energy costs are spiraling. So the President ordered a thorough review of the nation's energy needs, and now he's ready to outline a new approach. The centerpiece, efforts to increase production of fossil fuels. Bush wants to tap oil reserves even in the pristine Alaskan wilderness. He wants to encourage coal production for power stations. New regulations will make
benefits and dividends for the country.
But what about a different approach to the energy crisis, based on conservation, not increased fossil fuel production? This Virginia car dealership has started selling a hybrid petrol-electric car. Doesn't give incentive.
A pitifully small segment of the American market. People here still believe that on the road, bigger is better. And nothing in George Bush's energy plan is likely to change that.
Labour Club, he had to run the gauntlet of a group of largely countryside and fuel protesters. As he walked through them, a local man chucked an egg at him almost at point-blank range. John Prescott immediately swung round and landed a punch straight on his jaw. The man then wrestled the Deputy Prime Minister onto his back and held him down over a small wall as police and Labour Party officials tried to release him. Eventually they freed him, but Mr. Prescott's problems weren't over. Another protester then jostled him. before Labour members and police managed to get a very shaken-looking cabinet minister into the safety of the doors. Lawyers think it very unlikely that Mr Prescott could be charged.
This may be scrutinised by the court, but you are allowed to use reasonable force where you feel that you're acting in self-defence, where there's been an incident, a provocation that leads you to feel that you have no alternative but to hit out, because otherwise you may be at risk.
The guy shouldn't have thrown the egg. The Deputy Prime Minister shouldn't have reacted in the way it appears he did. And both of them should be dealt with by the law in the normal way like any other citizen. No matter how high or how low you are, the law should deal with each of you similarly.
Tonight, a Labour Party spokesman said John Prescott was attacked by a protester, and he defended himself from that attack as anyone would in the circumstances. They added, "We understand a man is being questioned and we can't comment further." Joe Andrews, ITN, Westminster.
Well, the man arrested after that brawl with Mr Prescott was released by police in the early hours. The 29-year-old was driven away from Rhyl police station. Police said he'd been bailed while further inquiries are carried out. It's expected officers will want to review television footage of the incident.
Good morning and welcome to Thursday morning here on BBC One.
Hello and welcome to Breakfast from BBC News with Sophie Rayworth and Jeremy Bowen.
It's 6 o'clock on Thursday the 17th of May. Prescott was involved in a scuffle as he arrived for a speech in Rhyl. A 29-year-old man was arrested and later released on police bail. Opposition parties have criticised Mr Prescott for reacting in the way he did.
A small-town event becomes a big political drama. The Deputy Prime Minister besieged by heckling protesters, and then completely out of the blue, an outburst of violence. Looking at the pictures again in slow motion, you can see the sequence of events unfold into a vicious scuffle. Labour sources say the egg thrown at Mr Prescott could well have felt like a punch in the face, and he later defended his actions.
I got off my bus into clearly a hostile crowd. I walked through all the jostling, and I was attacked by an individual. In the melee that followed, I clearly defended myself.
The protester was arrested, but the local Conservative candidate has called on Mr Prescott to resign. Senior party figures have been more restrained.
Of course, all of us in political life, we know that we are on occasion in positions where we are provoked or indeed under threat. What is important is to keep our cool. What is important is to engage in debate and not necessarily to lose one's temper in the process.
The guy shouldn't have thrown the egg, and the Deputy Prime Minister shouldn't have reacted in the way that he did. None of us is perfect, but both of them have to now be dealt with by the law in the usual way.
The papers this morning could have shown a beaming Tony Blair promoting his vision for Britain. Instead, it's his deputy throwing a punch. Not very New Labour at all. Philippa Thomas, BBC News, Westminster.
About 20,000 Liverpool fans were in Dortmund
by the collar and pushed him down onto a wall. Other protesters got involved in a scuffle until the police came in and finally pulled the man away from the Deputy Prime Minister and arrested him. Now, Mr Prescott stayed inside the little theatre for several hours last night. Police had advised him not to leave the building until most of the protesters had dispersed. When he eventually decided to come out of the building, I tried to catch up with him to find out what he had to say. There were lots of calls from the protesters outside for Mr Prescott to resign. I tried to put that question to him, but clearly Mr Prescott didn't have anything to say to me at that particular time. However, later on, Mr Prescott did release this statement.
I got off my bus into clearly a hostile crowd. I walked through all the jostling, and I was attacked by an individual. In the melee that followed, I clearly defended myself. I believe someone is now being questioned by the police, and it would be quite improper for me and quite wrong to add any further comment.
Well, another interesting day it's going to be for Mr Prescott. He continues on the campaign trail in Edinburgh today. A 29-year-old man was arrested last night. He's been released on police bail pending further inquiries. Back to you.
Melanie, for the time being, thanks very much indeed.
Let's get the reaction from Westminster now. Sue Jameson is there. Good morning, Sue. Bit of a shocking scene there yesterday.
Prescott a little off message, and then we had Jack Straw being slow hand-clapped as well. William Hague had his share of trouble yesterday because he went to Wolverhampton with his wife and they were heckled in a crowd there, and in fact the walkabout should have lasted around 20 minutes. It stopped at around 5. Officials did say that of course the heckling crowd had nothing to do with that, but it was a problem. Mr. Blair himself of course went to the hospital in Edgbaston where he was confronted by an angry woman there, Sharon Storer, who harassed him, harangued him about the NHS very effectively indeed for 4 minutes. And then we even had Peter Mandelson walking out of a TV interview. So, what a day.
OK, Sue Jameson at Westminster, thank you very much.
More on both those stories. That's the confrontation between Sharon Storer and the Prime Minister and the John Prescott incident throughout this morning's news hour. Right now, the rest of the news with Carla. Good morning, Carla.
Morning, John. Thank you. Good morning. A former dresser to the Duchess of York is waking up to a life...
John Prescott last night. John Prescott indeed has admitted striking the man, although John Prescott and the Labour Party say it was done entirely in self-defence after the Deputy Prime Minister was apparently struck by an egg at very close range. The local Conservative candidate, Mr Murphy, in the area has said that Mr Prescott should actually resign over the incident, although there's been more measured comment from all the main parties this morning. Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives both saying Mr Prescott should have not struck the man back, although the Labour Party have rallied to Mr Prescott's cause, saying he was clearly assaulted at very close range and took evasive action. Nonetheless, of course, it has certainly in North Wales locally taken the whole campaign off the rails, and indeed a lot of the protesters there saying this was an inevitable consequence of unhappiness up there with government policies on fuel and of course on the environment and on the countryside.
Okay, Carol Walker, political correspondent here in the studio. What's the political fallout going to be from Prescott's punch?
Well, I think, interestingly enough, Jeremy, it's actually brought the campaign alive. We've been here for the past week or so.
Always helps, doesn't it?